This is Dr. Justina Agnieszka Chevalier. I decided that because in the United States and in many countries that are built in a similar system, though off head I cannot really come up with one, education seems to be paid, and that is another right that is violated, that I will submit videos that are free education, and that free education will be in different subjects, divided into subjects. And in this video I would like to start possibly with let me see, I've posted the civic education, I've posted the American dream, which is on relationships in a sufficient way. I did have some stuff to add, but maybe later on. I am thinking English language is a useful topic. I have a Cambridge certificate in advanced English, which means that I've studied actually British English, and I've studied British language also in context of literature, and so I have credentials to give classes in English, and so I could give, for instance, a review of tenses. The American language provides a constraint, English language education, which consists of reduced grammar and reduced vocabulary in comparison to British language. Mostly it is for purposes of international communication, because persons that live in the area of the United States come from many places and have come from many places for generations. That is useful, therefore, to learn a language that is a little bit more prone to give a chance to express more detail in speech. Now, there is a topic associated with it that is meant for parents and for especially teenagers, which is an abuse of language to actually express words related to human love. That sometimes, because of verbalization of certain things, causes severe distress in parents, especially in parents, but also in environments of children, because persons that are young lack emotional elevation, in lacking empiric expressions and experiences of what love is. Persons, very young ones, are interested in details of procreation, for instance, and so children often add to language detailed descriptions of body parts pertinent to procreation, and use those to label or mark all positive emotions, human emotions, to chastise especially parents. And when those marriages often are settled and or maturing still, especially with persons who are still making their own life, then that creates a life that is based and turns around the child. In my professional experience, I've noticed that many children were actually quite difficult to manage by parents, and that was because mostly of that forceful chastising and punishing to prevent parents from separating sometimes, and to also gain attention from parents to the child as opposed to the spouse, which brings strong resentment. To not to unload that on children it is good to teach children from very early age that these Buddhist rules, and I'm a Buddhist, that apply to um, well, they have two contexts. First one is they apply to actually not creating evil by speaking out what is called in Buddhism in mind theories alaya, which means information that appears by analogies to own life in mind from sometimes early mornings, all day, often to all of us, by analogies to situations, drawing analogies from across all over life that we lived and are pertinent to others, so that we actually know what situation others are in and we can find ourselves a point of reference to it and then take an appropriate action or understand simply what persons are going through. Thoughts are often in Buddhism described as monkey brain, which means monkey brain is a well in meditation, in classical meditation classes, a person will explain that these are thoughts that come and through similar to bodily perceptions and impressions that we sitting in stillness are supposed to allow come and go. It is true, but we need to also know that some of these are it's a real monkey, and these are real impressions of others. And so when these cause distress, some monks recommend for instance, you can engage in chanting and repetition of one phrase so that you ignore those, and then they stop. The same as not responding or ignoring a person if a person actually is not to pursue a collaboration, and that ignoring is to mark that a person actually will no longer seek attention, the same as ignored child, and will pursue figuring out whatever it is that that person has been planning and doing on own account. And that promotes personal development and is considered good. So for instance, usually persons who are the same as children ignored develop on agendas and business plans and develop on a business lacking network business means, and those are usually much more innovative than entering any network. And so similar is with that monkey brain. Even though there may be children and humans suffering somewhere, and so that creates that need to make an imprint in those thoughts passing, coming and going, drawing those analogies to self, that sometimes we wonder, okay, why do I have these memories or thoughts of this and that? And this is to actually let know what others are coming through by having these same situations anew, fresh in memory. And so sometimes we can ignore it, and sometimes it is okay to take an action, and a lecture is an action. And so, for example, that a monkey brain is just an ecosystem letting know what is happening around, and a real monkey that wants a banana, and so instead of ignoring it, we can just stand up from meditative pose and handle a banana to a monkey. And that is why not always the peace of mind comes from meditation. Sometimes we can help it with a appropriate action. The language, before actually I'm thinking maybe I will start with actually English language, and give that class to persons who speak English as first language but want to learn more details, or learned English from early childhood and that became a main language, like I did, and that is in no negligence to other languages living in different cultures, which makes persons bilingual or more. Not necessarily parents are source of language. Parents, when children are schooled, are secondary source of language. However, that language often, which is of interest, by remembering parents and friends and siblings and friends from childhood, persons engage in adivinations or guessing what the other one is like. And therefore, because we are quite restricted in a person to person contact society, we often guess erroneously and assume vocabulary of a parent, a friend, or a spouse or ex-spouses, or vocabulary of childhood friends as vocabulary that became assimilated, and in some persons that appears as being narrated about and causes distress. Instead of having an inner monologue, a person has an impression that this is translated in vocabulary that is not own, and that sometimes is like being a child that is non-stop still watched to correct actions, and is upsetting past adulthood, because in adulthood we pursue individualism and we pursue also well, being self, to pursue relationships that are in nature intimate and long term, and therefore having vocabulary forced from even one other person, such as father, mother, etc., by speculations that arrives to mind as some say streamed thoughts. This is simply alaya, meaning one is surprised by vocabulary that arrives to one, and alaya means speculations in this particular context of others about a own mind content, and also content of vocabulary of a person, and instead of contrasting such with a person, taking as point of reference connections and not investing assimilation of vocabulary, you see, because we all across our lives have that capacity of ignoring about 90% of all information that arrives to mind. The vocabulary of parents, of also ex-spouses, and of all persons from childhood rarely is a vocabulary of an adult person that is by that person's preferred and natural. And so that sometimes done by persons who do not know anymore the other one imposes on a person an impression of being requested or forced on, creating a small replica of a parent, a childhood friend, or somebody else. And that, unfortunately, often includes vocabulary that is intimate, meaning related to body parts or sexuality and things like that. And persons are at that wrong, because it actually creates strong distress from early years to later on. And so what a person then often also does when arriving as a new connection is mimic vocabulary of a person that he and she wants to convey a relationship type or certain emotions in parallel with, using the same vocabulary. And so we need to know that even in childhood, but also in adult life, certain relationships are intimate long-term relationship, and so doing such impedes getting to know self, or allowing to self to be known, and imposes an impression on the other that the other one is trying to enact someone else, and hence that leads to perception of language as being full of offenses, and that which once formed an endearment becomes an offense from a stranger because it is a different person.